The Velthari Dominion had ruled over 300 star systems for nearly 8,000 years. Their black warships moved through space like predators, and no species had ever challenged them. They had conquered dozens of worlds, enslaved billions of beings, and built an empire that stretched across the galaxy. When they first found humanity 2,000 years ago, they looked at the small blue planet called Earth and laughed. These creatures were nothing. They had barely learned to leave their own world. They were weak, soft, and lived such short lives that they barely mattered. The Dominion did not bother to conquer Earth. Instead, they signed a treaty with the humans, drawing lines in space and telling humanity to stay within them. It was like giving a child a small room and telling them never to leave. The Velthari expected the humans to obey, to remain small and afraid, to know their place in the universe. For 2,000 years, humanity had been quiet. They stayed in their little corner of space. They answered when the Dominion called. They submitted their reports and paid their tributes. But lately, something had changed. Ambassador Cale Vorn stood on the command deck of the Dominion flagship, a massive vessel called the Eternal Shadow. His gray body was tall and thin, covered in armor that his people had not worn in actual combat for 600 years. There had been no need. No one fought the Dominion anymore. They simply surrendered. Cale watched through the viewport as a human ship approached. It was small, barely worth noticing. The humans had requested this meeting, which Cale found amusing. They had been acting strangely in recent months. They had stopped answering routine calls. They had built things near the edge of their space. They had refused to let Dominion inspectors examine their worlds. It was time to remind them of their place. The human shuttle docked. 3 figures walked into the meeting chamber. The one in front was a woman with brown hair turning gray at the edges. She had lines on her face from age, but her eyes were bright and sharp. She smiled as she entered, a warm and friendly expression that made Cale uncomfortable for reasons he did not understand. Her name was Grace Sullivan, and she led something called the United Earth Coalition. Behind her walked a large man with broad shoulders and gray eyes that seemed to be measuring everything in the room. This was Admiral Nathan Cole. The third human was a smaller woman named Dr. Lisa Monroe, who moved with the quiet confidence of someone who knew a secret. Cale did not waste time with pleasantries. He activated a holographic display showing the Dominion's demands. Humanity would stop all unauthorized expansion. They would allow their genetic material to be cataloged. They would provide resources and workers as tribute to the Dominion, so it was proper for a lesser species. Grace listened to everything without interrupting. Her expression did not change. When Cale finished speaking, she tilted her head slightly to one side. "And if we say no?" she asked. Cale's vertical pupils narrowed. No species had ever said no. The question itself was absurd. Then the Dominion will correct your behavior by force. Your worlds will burn. Your people will be enslaved or destroyed. There is no other outcome. Grace looked at Nathan, then at Lisa. Something passed between them, a silent communication that Cale could not read. Then Grace Sullivan did something that would be studied by Velthari scholars for centuries. She smiled. It was not a smile of fear or nervousness. It was the expression of someone who had been waiting for exactly this moment. "Hi, Commander Cale," she said, her voice still warm and friendly. "Please tell the Dominion Council that humanity says no to all of it. Every demand, every tribute, every rule you have placed on us for 2,000 years. She paused, and her smile grew slightly wider. "And if the Council wishes to discuss this further, they are welcome to visit Earth. We have been waiting a very long time for this conversation." The humans turned and walked back to their shuttle. They did not hurry. They did not look back. Grace Sullivan moved like someone leaving a party, not someone who had just defied the most powerful empire in the galaxy. Cale stood frozen in the docking bay. Long after their ship had departed, something was wrong. Something was very, very wrong. He had delivered that ultimatum to dozens of species over the centuries. He had seen fear, desperation, anger, and despair. He had never seen what he had just witnessed. The humans had not been afraid. They had been amused. A cold sensation spread through Cale's body. touching his secondary heart in a way he had not felt since he was young. It took him a moment to recognize the feeling, because his people had not experienced it in so long. It was fear. He returned to his quarters, prepared his report for the council. As he wrote, he found himself replaying the meeting in his mind. Grace Sullivan's calm voice. Nathan Cole's measuring eyes. Lisa Monroe's quiet smile. 3 humans facing the might of the Dominion, and not one of them had shown even a trace of worry. Why? The humans were weak. Everyone knew this. Their bodies were soft and broke easily. They lived only 80 or 90 years, barely a blink compared to the Vel-3 lifespan. They had been confined to a handful of star systems for 2,000 years. Their ships were small and primitive. Their weapons were laughable. And yet Cale thought about the things the humans had been doing lately. The structures they had been building at the edge of their space. The inspections they had refused. The questions they had stopped answering. He thought about how little the Dominion actually knew about what humanity had been doing for the past several centuries. We stopped paying attention to them, he realized. We assumed they would remain small and obedient forever. We never bothered to check. His report to the council was straightforward. Humans had refused all demands and should be punished accordingly. But as he sent the message, Cale added something at the end. A personal note. A warning. The human leader smiled at me, he wrote. Not with fear or false courage. She smiled as though I had given her good news. I recommend caution. Something is not right. The council would probably ignore his warning. They had ruled the galaxy for 8,000 years. They did not know how to feel caution anymore. But Cale could not shake the image of Grace Sullivan's face from his mind. That knowing smirk. That warm, patient expression. That was not the face of someone who expected to lose. That was the face of someone who had. Already won, the Dominion Council met within hours of receiving Cale's report. 12 ancient beings sat in a chamber carved from black stone. A room that had witnessed the rise and fall of countless species over 8,000 years. Holographic displays floated in the air, showing the vast expanse of Dominion territory. Millions of ships. Trillions of subjects. Weapons powerful enough to crack planets in half. High Sovereign Melith was the oldest among them. Her white carapace, showing the marks of nearly 4,000 years of life. She listened as Cale delivered his report in person, standing before the council like a soldier reporting to his generals. They refused, Cale said for the 3rd time. He still could not quite believe it himself. The human female smiled at me as though I had told her a joke.
Show me,
Melith commanded. Show me this human's face. Recording played on the central display. Grace Sullivan standing calm and composed. Her glance toward her companions. That small, knowing smirk before she spoke her refusal. Stop there, Melith said. The image froze on Grace's face. The ancient sovereign studied it for a long moment, her eyes narrowing. Do you see it, Council? That is not the defiance of someone who does not understand what she faces. That is not false bravery or foolish pride.
Oh.
Melith paused. That is the expression of someone who has been waiting. Asked Cale. Melith did not answer. Instead, she ordered the intelligence archives opened. Every piece of information about humanity was to be gathered and analyzed. Reports came back within a day, and they raised more questions than they answered. Human population, unknown. The last count humanity had submitted was over 300 years old. It had listed 12 billion people. Since then, humans had politely declined all requests for updated numbers. Human territory, officially 17 star systems. But long-range sensors had detected strange activity in regions that should have been empty. Ships moving through sectors where no ships should be. Energy signatures that did not match anything in the database. Human military. Officially 800 small defensive vessels, but those numbers had not been updated in 500 years. Every request to inspect human military facilities had been politely refused. We have not actually looked at the humans in a very long time, Melith said quietly. We assumed they remained as they were. Small, weak, obedient. Councilmember Dreth rose from his seat. He was a military commander, a warrior who had crushed rebellions across 4 sectors. His body was covered in battle scars, and his voice carried the confidence of someone who had never lost a fight. "This is foolishness," Dreth declared. "They are humans. Soft bodies, short lives, primitive minds. Whatever little projects they have been working on in their corner of space, they cannot amount to anything significant. I say we send a correction fleet, 300 warships. We burn a few of their worlds, kill a few million of them, and remind them of their place in the universe. This matter will be resolved within a month," Council voted. The decision was unanimous. 300 wars. HIPs would depart for human space immediately, carrying enough firepower to turn a dozen planets into ash. Dreth led the fleet personally. He was eager to add another conquered species to his long list of victories. As his flagship departed, he sent a message ahead to the humans. It was tradition. Surrender or be destroyed. They had 3 standard days to comply. The response came from a human named Captain Daniel Brooks. He commanded a small border station called Threshold, a structure that held perhaps a few hundred humans at most. His message was brief and delivered in a calm, almost bored voice. "Dominion Fleet, you are entering restricted space. You have been warned. Humanity suggests you reconsider. This is your only notice." Dreth had the message replayed for his command staff. Laughter filled the bridge. A tiny station with a handful of humans warning away 300 Dominion warships. It was the most ridiculous thing any of them had ever heard. "These creatures truly do not understand what is coming," Dreth said, still chuckling. "Perhaps we should capture this Captain Brooks alive. I would enjoy explaining reality to him in person." Fleet continued forward. 300 black warships moving through space like a swarm of predators. Each vessel carried weapons that could glass a continent. Together, they represented more firepower than most species encountered in their entire history. On the 3rd day, the fleet crossed the border into human space. The laughter stopped almost immediately. It started with the sensors. They began detecting mass signatures that made no sense. Ships were appearing on the screens, but the numbers could not be right. The readings showed thousands of vessels, far more than the humans were supposed to possess. "Commander, I am reading over 2,000 ships converging on our position," reported the sensor officer. Her voice was uncertain, confused. "But that is impossible. The humans do not have 2,000 ships. Your equipment is malfunctioning," Dreth said. "Recalibrate it." "I have recalibrated it 3 times, Commander. The readings are accurate." The officer paused, and when she spoke again, her voice had changed. Fear had crept into it. "Commander, these vessels are enormous. They are larger than anything in our fleet. Some of them are larger than anything I have ever seen." Dreth moved to the viewport, his confidence finally beginning to crack. He looked out into the darkness of space, waiting for visual confirmation of what the sensors were showing. They came out of the black, like monsters rising from the deep, human ships, but nothing like the small craft in the Dominion database. These were warships in every sense of the word. Massive hulls bristling with weapons. Engines that glowed with power the Dominion could not identify. The smallest of them was larger than Dreth's flagship. The largest was the size of a small moon at the front of the formation. It flew a ship so vast that sensors could barely comprehend it. Its name was painted on the hull in letters large enough to read from space.constellation.a. Human voice came through on an open channel, calm, almost friendly. It belonged to Admiral Nathan Cole, the same man who had stood silently beside Grace Sullivan in the Dominion Council chamber. "Dominion Fleet. This is Admiral Cole of the United Earth Navy. I believe you were warned. Captain Brooks, please note for the official record that the Dominion has now been warned twice." Noted. Admiral came. The response from the border station, "Excellent." Cole's voice shifted slightly. The friendliness remained, but something harder appeared beneath it. "Dominion Commander, you have entered human space with hostile intent. You have 30 seconds to reverse course and withdraw. After that, we will demonstrate why humanity has been quiet for 2,000 years. It was not because we were weak." Pause. "It was because we were waiting until we were ready." Dreth stared at the viewport, at the impossible fleet arrayed against him. His mind refused to accept what his eyes were showing. This could not be real. The humans were primitives. They were nothing. All ships, he commanded, forcing his voice to stay steady. Attack formation. Destroy them all. It was the last order he would ever give as a free being. The battle lasted 11 minutes. When the first Dominion ship fired its weapons, the crew expected to see human vessels explode. They expected easy targets, soft kills, a quick victory. Instead, their weapons splashed harmlessly against energy shields that shimmered like liquid silver. The humans did not even slow down. Then the humans fired back. The beams that erupted from the human ships were unlike anything the Dominion had ever encountered. They cut through Velthury shields as though they did not exist. They sliced through armored hulls like a hot blade through soft flesh. The first Dominion warship did not explode so much as it simply came apart. Pieces scattering into the void, Commander Dreth watched in horror as his fleet began to die. 300 ships that represented the pride of the Dominion Navy were being taken apart with surgical precision. The humans were not fighting like savages or barbarians. They were fighting like surgeons, cutting exactly where they needed to cut, striking exactly where they needed to strike. All ships, evasive action, Dreth shouted. Scatter. Retreat. But there was nowhere to go. The human fleet had surrounded them completely. Ships that moved faster than anything Dominion sensors could track. Weapons that reached across impossible distances. Coordination so perfect that it seemed almost choreographed. Like a dance that humanity had practiced for centuries. Because they had. On the bridge of the Constellation, Admiral Nathan Cole watched the battle unfold on dozens of holographic displays. His face showed no joy, no excitement, no bloodlust, only calm focus. He had trained for this moment his entire life. His father had trained for it. His grandfather had trained for it. Going back nearly 2,000 years, generation after generation of humans had prepared for exactly this day. Targeting their engines and weapon systems, reported his tactical officer, a young woman named Emma Ward. Minimizing casualties as ordered, Admiral Good, Cole said. We are not butchers. We do not want to exterminate them. We want them to understand. Across the battlefield, Dominion ships tried desperately to escape. Some attempted to jump to faster than light speed. But human vessels had already deployed devices that prevented such travel. Some tried to surrender, broadcasting their submission on all channels. Human ships accepted these surrenders, disabling the vessels without destroying them, taking crews prisoner with efficiency that bordered on gentle. Others kept fighting. These ships were destroyed quickly and cleanly. Dreth's flagship was among the last vessels still operational. Human ships had surrounded it, their weapons trained on the bridge where Dreth stood watching his world collapse. A voice came through the communications system. Admiral Cole again, Commander Dreth, your fleet is defeated. You may surrender now and preserve the lives of your remaining crew. Or you may continue fighting and die. The choice is yours, but I recommend the first option. Humanity has no desire to kill more of your people than necessary. Dreth's claws gripped the command console so hard that it cracked beneath his fingers. 8,000 years of Dominion supremacy. Hundreds of conquered species. Billions of enslaved subjects. And now this. Defeated by creatures they had dismissed as insignificant for 2 millennia. I surrender, he said. The words tasted like poison on his tongue. Within minutes, human soldiers boarded his flagship. They moved with precision and discipline, securing the crew without unnecessary violence. Dreth found himself placed in restraints and escorted to a shuttle that carried him to the Constellation. The human flagship was even more impressive from the inside. The corridors were wide and clean, humming with energy that Dreth could feel in his bones. The humans who moved through those corridors looked at him with curiosity, but not hatred. Some even nodded politely as he passed. They brought him to a large room with windows overlooking the battlefield. The wreckage of his fleet drifted in the void, pieces of destroyed ships tumbling slowly through space. Among the debris, human rescue vessels moved carefully, searching for survivors. Admiral Cole stood by the windows, his hands clasped behind his back. He turned as Dreth was brought in, his gray eyes studying the defeated commander with something that might have been respect. 2,000 years, Cole said quietly. That is how long humanity has been preparing for this day. We knew from the moment your ancestors looked at our planet and decided we were beneath notice that this moment would eventually come. So we waited. We built. We planned. His throat felt tight, his mind still refusing to fully accept what had happened. Your people made a mistake, Cole continued. You saw our short lives and thought it made us weak. You thought we would be hasty, impatient, unable to plan for the future. I smiled slightly. You did not understand that our short lives make us burn brighter. We know our time is limited, so we make every moment count. We build not for ourselves, but for our children and grandchildren. Generation after generation, each one carrying the torch a little further, Cole gestured toward the battlefield. Every ship you see out there was built by people who knew they would never live to see this day. They worked their entire lives to create something they would never use, and they did it gladly because they knew their descendants would need it. He turned to face Dreth directly. That is what ever understood about humanity? Our short lives do not make us weak. They make us patient in ways you cannot comprehend. We have been planning this moment for 2,000 years, 20,000 lifetimes of preparation, and now we are ready. Dreth finally found his voice. It came out as a croak. What do you want? Cole's expression softened slightly. We want what every species wants, to live in peace, to raise our children without fear, to explore the universe on our own terms. He paused. We never wanted this war, Commander. We wanted to be left alone. But your people made that impossible. You demanded our submission. You threatened our worlds. You gave us no choice. So now you will conquer us? Dreth asked. Enslave us as we enslaved others. No, Cole shook his head. We are not like you. We do not want to rule the galaxy. We do not want tribute or slaves or obedience. We want equals. Species who will trade with us, learn with us, grow with us. He looked back at the battlefield. But we will never again allow another species to threaten our survival. Never again will humanity kneel before anyone. Communication came through. Cole listened, then nodded. Your survivors are being collected and treated. Your wounded are receiving medical care. When the time is right, you will be released to return to your council and deliver our message. What message? Dreth asked. Cole smiled, and for a moment, he looked just like Grace Sullivan had looked in that diplomatic chamber. Patient, knowing, amused. And the galaxy will never be the same. The news of the disaster reached the Dominion Council before any official report arrived. Traders carried whispers across the star lanes. Refugees fled from border systems with wild stories. Scattered communications from the handful of survivors painted a picture so impossible that many refused to believe it. 300 warships destroyed in 11 minutes. A human fleet numbering in the thousands. Weapons that cut through Dominion shields like they were made of paper. Hi, Sovereign. Melith convened an emergency session of the Council. The ancient chamber, which had witnessed 8,000 years of Dominion glory, felt different now. The shadows seemed deeper. The black stone walls felt less permanent. The confidence that had filled this room for millennia was gone, replaced by something cold and unfamiliar. Fear intelligence officers worked around the clock, gathering every piece of information they could find about humanity. What they discovered changed everything the Dominion believed about the galaxy. Humanity had not been sitting quietly in their little corner of space for 2,000 years. They had been growing, expanding, building. Their official territory included 17 star systems. This was what the Dominion had been told. This was what was written in the treaties. But the truth was vastly different. Human explorers had pushed out into regions the Dominion never bothered to survey. They had claimed star systems in the darkness between galactic arms. They had spread into areas so remote that no one had thought to look. The true extent of human space was not 17 systems, it was over 400. The intelligence reports made Mella's blood run cold. 400 systems connected by a network of transit gates that allowed instant travel across impossible distances. Humanity could move fleets from one end of their territory to the other in moments. They could strike anywhere and retreat before anyone knew they had been there. But the territory was only part of the revelation. Their population was not 12 billion. As the old record stated, that number had been a lie maintained for 300 years. The true human population was closer to 900 billion souls. They lived on terraformed worlds and orbital stations aboard vast generation ships that roamed between the stars. They had spread across 400 systems like seeds scattered by the wind, taking root everywhere they landed. 900 billion humans. The Dominion had assumed they were dealing with a minor species barely worth noticing. Instead, they faced one of the largest populations in the galaxy. And then there was their technology. Human ships were not primitive. They had not stagnated over 2,000 years of isolation. Freed from the need to reveal their capabilities, human scientists had pushed the boundaries of what was possible. They had mastered fusion power, then moved beyond it to antimatter. Then they had discovered something the intelligence officers could not even name. An energy source that seemed to pull power from empty space itself. Their weapons were centuries ahead of anything the Dominion possessed. Their shields could withstand firepower that would destroy a planet. Their ships were faster, stronger, more maneuverable than anything the Dominion had ever built. "They have been playing weak," Melith said, her voice barely above a whisper. "For 2,000 years, they have been pretending to be harmless while they built all of this." But the most disturbing discovery was not about ships or weapons or population numbers. It was about how the humans thought cultural analysis revealed something the Dominion had completely misunderstood. They had looked at human lifespans, 80 or 90 years compared to the centuries-long lives of the Velthri, and assumed this made humans impatient and short-sighted. They had been completely wrong. Humans did not think in terms of their own lives. They thought in terms of generations. The intelligence reports included translated communications. From human leaders spanning centuries, messages passed between grandparents and grandchildren, plans laid by one generation and completed by the next. Goals set by people who knew they would never live to see them achieved. They called it the long preparation, nearly 2,000 years ago. When the first human leaders signed that treaty with the Dominion, they had known what they were doing. They had looked at the Velthari and understood that their species faced a choice: submit forever, or prepare for the day when submission was no longer an option. They chose to prepare. Generation after generation, humans had worked toward a single goal. Scientists developed technology in hidden facilities. Engineers built ships in secret shipyards. Soldiers trained for a war they knew they would never fight. Parents taught children. Children taught grandchildren. The torch passed from hand to hand, never dropping, always moving forward. 20,000 human lifetimes. That was how long the preparation had taken. 20,000 generations, each one contributing what they could, each one trusting that the next generation would carry on. "They're never afraid of us," Melith said, finally understanding. "From the very beginning, they knew this day would come. They studied us. They learned our weaknesses. They used our own arrogance against us." A transmission arrived while the council was still absorbing the intelligence reports. It was from Grace Sullivan, speaking now not as a diplomat but as the leader of a species that had finally revealed its true face. "High Sovereign Melith, council members. By now, you understand what humanity truly is. For 2,000 years, we have watched your empire. We have learned from your mistakes. We have prepared for this moment with patience that your long-lived species could never match." Her voice was calm, almost gentle, but the words carried weight. "We do not seek your destruction. We are not conquerors. We have no desire to rule over others as you have ruled. But we will no longer accept a universe where our children must live in fear. We will no longer bow to species who see us as inferior. The time for that is past. The choice before you is simple. Accept a galaxy where humanity stands as equals, where all species are free to determine their own fate, or discover just how thoroughly we have prepared for those who cannot accept this reality." Grace paused, and when she spoke again, there was steel beneath the softness. "We have waited 2,000 years. We can wait longer if we must. But I hope, for the sake of both our peoples, that waiting will not be necessary." The transmission ended. The council sat in stunned silence. For the first time in 8,000 years, the Dominion had no good options. They could not defeat humanity in war. They could not contain them. They could not ignore them. The small, weak species they had dismissed for millennia had become the most powerful force in the galaxy. Melith looked around the chamber at her fellow council members. Ancient beings who had ruled over countless star systems, who had never known defeat, who had believed themselves supreme for longer than most. Species had existed. "We have a decision to make," she said quietly. "And for the first time in our history, we must make it carefully. Because the consequences of choosing wrong could mean the end of everything we have built." No one argued. No one suggested another attack. The time for such foolishness had passed. The galaxy was changing. The Dominion would have to change with it, or be swept away. 6 months passed after the Battle of Threshold. They were not peaceful months. The news of humanity's victory spread across the galaxy like fire through dry grass. Species that had lived under Dominion rule for thousands of years suddenly saw a possibility where before there had been none. If the humans could stand against the Velthari, perhaps others could too. Rebellions sparked across a dozen sectors. Old grudges rose to the surface. Conquered peoples who had accepted their fate for generations suddenly remembered what freedom meant. The carefully maintained order of 8,000 years began to crack and crumble. The Dominion tried to hold itself together. But the truth was impossible to hide. Their greatest fleet had been destroyed in minutes. Their most feared commander had been captured and released like a child caught misbehaving. The species they had dismissed as insignificant had revealed themselves to be more powerful than the Empire itself. "Hi." Sovereign Melith watched her realm begin to fall apart and knew that something had to change. The old ways would not work anymore. The Dominion could not simply conquer its way out of this crisis. They faced a choice that no Velthari leader had faced in 8 millennia. Adapt or die. She sent a message to Grace Sullivan, requesting a meeting. Not through diplomats or ambassadors. Not through formal channels. A direct conversation between two leaders who held the fate of billions in their hands. Grace agreed. They met on a neutral station far from the borders of either territory. In a room with wide windows, looking out at the endless stars, Melith arrived first, her ancient body moving slowly, her white carapace marked by 4,000 years of life. She had ruled the Dominion for over 2 centuries. She had seen empires rise and fall, but she had never seen anything like humanity. Grace Sullivan arrived with Admiral Cole at her side. She looked older than she had during their last encounter, the stress of the past 6 months showing on her face, but her eyes were still sharp. And she still carried herself with that quiet confidence that had so unnerved Ambassador Kale. "Thank you for agreeing to meet," Melith said as they sat across from each other. Grace nodded. "We have much to discuss." "Yes." Melith looked out at the stars for a moment before continuing. "You have won. I do not say this to flatter you or to gain advantage in negotiation. It is simply truth. The Dominion cannot defeat humanity. Perhaps we never could. We did not want this war," Grace said. "We wanted to be left alone, to live in peace, to raise our children without the shadow of your empire hanging over them." She paused. "But you made that impossible." "Yes," Melith agreed. "We were arrogant. We saw your short lives and assumed you were lesser beings. We did not understand that you experience time differently than we do." She turned to look at Grace directly. "A human who lives 80 years burns with an intensity we cannot match. Your urgency, your drive, your refusal to accept limits, these are not weaknesses. They are the greatest strengths in the universe." Grace said nothing, waiting for Melith to continue. "My people live for thousands of years," the High Sovereign said. "We thought this made us superior. We believed that our long view, our patience, our accumulated wisdom made us better than shorter-lived species." She made a sound that might have been a laugh. "We were fools. Our long lives made us slow, careful, afraid of change. We stopped growing because we assumed we had already reached perfection and humanity." Grace asked. "Humanity never stopped growing. Every generation of yours pushes further than the last. You build for children you will never meet. You dream of futures you will never see. And somehow, impossibly, you achieve those dreams. Melith's ancient eyes held something like wonder. 20,000 generations, working toward a single goal. We could never have done that. We lack the fire, and the two leaders talked for hours. What emerged was not a treaty in the traditional sense. It was something new, a framework for a different kind of galaxy. The Dominion would not be destroyed. That was not what humanity wanted, but it would change. The species that had lived under Velthari rule would be given choices they had never had before. Some would join humanity's growing coalition. Others would chart their own paths. The rigid hierarchy that had controlled the galaxy for 8,000 years would give way to something messier. It's more chaotic, but ultimately more free. This will not be easy, Melith warned. My people have ruled for 8 millennia. Many will resist this change. There will be those who would rather fight and die than accept a new order. We know, Grace said. There are humans who feel the same way, who want revenge for 2,000 years of living under your shadow, who want to tear the Dominion apart and scatter its pieces across the void. She shook her head. We are not angels, High Sovereign. We are just as capable of hatred and cruelty as any other species. But we have also learned, through our long preparation, that building is better than destroying, that the future is more important than the past. When the formal discussions ended, Grace did something unexpected. She reached out and touched Meloth's ancient hand, a gesture of contact between species that had never touched before. We are not your enemies, Grace said. We never wanted to be, but we will never again be your subjects. Not for any price, not for any reason. If your people can accept that, then we can build something together. Something better than what came before. Meloth's eyes, ancient and weary, held something that might have been respect, or perhaps hope. I believe you, she said. And I believe the galaxy is entering an age that will make the last 8,000 years seem like a prologue. She paused. I wonder if we will survive it. Grace smiled, that same knowing expression that had started everything 6 months ago. That depends on whether you can learn to change, she said. Humanity spent 2,000 years preparing for this moment. We learned patience from necessity. Perhaps your people can learn it from example. The leaders parted. The agreements were broadcast across the galaxy. And humanity, after 2 millennia of waiting, finally stepped onto the galactic stage as something no one had expected. Not conquerors, not destroyers, not the savage barbarians that so many species had assumed them to be. Equals, somewhere in the depths of human space. On a world that had been hidden from outside observation for nearly 2,000 years, a monument stood. It had been built by the very first generation of the long preparation. The people who had looked at the stars and decided that their descendants would stand among them as equals. The inscription was simple, carved in stone that had weathered 20 centuries. For those who come after. We build today so you may stand tomorrow. Beneath those words, a later generation had added a single line. Tomorrow has arrived, and across the galaxy, on hundreds of worlds in thousands of ships. Among the trillions of beings who would shape the future, a new age began. An age of uncertainty and possibility. An age where the old rules no longer applied to new ones. It had yet to be written. An age where humanity was finally free. The 2,000-year peace was over. But something better was beginning.